special guest joining the show now. And before I bring him on, I just want to say, all of our listeners out there, this is the man who's behind it all. He's been here for 25 plus years now. He does a great job. The director of broadcasting, chief operator Joe Tarantowski, joins Extra Innings, I believe, for the first time, and he hosted the Jimi Hendrix Marathon this past Thursday. And we wanted to get him on the show before, but better late than never. Joe, how's it going tonight?
Good. I'm almost recovered from Thursday, but it's good.
18 hours of Jimi Hendrix, my personal opinion, the best guitarist to ever live. You played a lot of live tracks on the show. Jimi Hendrix even was speaking for a lot of the marathon. So can you give us a little bit of insight on everything that took place behind the scenes?
Well, it's interesting. I think there's, for the folks that have been, Sting listeners, Sting fans for a long time, and have been listening to the marathons, I think that you'll find out that there's a variety of reasons that people do marathons. Sometimes people have a passion for a band or artist. Sometimes they know a lot about them, collecting them for years, which was the case with me and Gordon Lightfoot. I've been listening to Gordon Lightfoot most of my life. Or it might be because someone wants to learn more about it. So I was a fan of Hendrix, but I didn't know a lot about him. So I thought that this would be a good time to try to learn. And when I first came up with the idea of possibly doing Hendrix, I didn't know that he only had 3 albums in his life. 3 albums that he helped produce before he'd passed. His career was just taking off in the late 60s, and it's weird because now we mention him in the same breath with all of those other stars from that time period. So the idea that so many recordings came from live sets that he did and appearances that he had made and things like that is kind of amazing that we have as much as we have. But partly because of the fact that people recorded stuff off of soundboards. And that's one of the things that's interesting. I found interesting was that, you said one of the best guitarists. There are a lot of people who argue about that.
It's arguable, yeah, in my opinion.
Oh, no. My son's a guitarist, and he thinks that Jimi Hendrix is probably the best guitarist of all time. He might not be. There are other guitarists who are virtuosos that play well and play fast and play clean. But the idea that Jimi Hendrix had his own way of doing things, his own style, his own timing. He was just one of a kind. So that's amazing. So after I did all the research and I started listening to more and more Hendrix, I thought that trying to play his appearances in their entirety, was kind of the way to showcase his work, because each one of those things, whether it's the Live at Berkeley Community Theater, or obviously Woodstock, or the Pops Festival, Monterey Pops Festival, those are all sort of snapshots in time and historic on their own. Each one of those, the New Year's Eve concert at with the I almost said Gypsy Kings, the Band of Gypsies, right? They're all these great, not just they are great evenings, moments, but I think that they hold together better than trying to play his songs just at random, because he didn't have that many, and when you hear it put together, you appreciate the feeling and the vibe of that performance and what they were feeling, and the commentary, like you said. You heard a lot of his words, what he said at those concerts. I just came from the theater, so the idea of going to a performance is really fresh in my head,
Absolutely. And you talk about, as I said, one of the best to ever do it, and you mentioned the Woodstock Music Festival, which I'll tease real quick. We have the Woodstock special of Extra Innings coming up on August 18th, so a little bit a month away. But when you think of those live performances from Hendrix, and obviously a lot of us weren't alive or didn't get to see Hendrix live because of his short lifespan, obviously, and the youth of a lot of us at that time. I mean, I wasn't even born yet, but Joe, I'm sure you were only 7, 8 years old at the time. So can you tell me a little bit about, the feeling that you may have had just listening to some of his live performances, and just how maybe the listening base or the crowd there could have had that vibe as well, especially during the marathon.
Well, it's interesting because in 1968, I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember the Beatles kind of being on the scene. I do not ever remember Hendrix on the radio or anything when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, he wasn't that popular. When he played at the Hollywood Bowl, he opened up with Sgt. Pepper's.
Mm-hmm.
Sgt. Pepper's had come out, that was August. The album dropped in late May.
Mm-hmm.
And he's coming out and opening with Sgt. Pepper's 2 months later,
Mm-hmm.
Which was astounded a lot of people. So I don't remember him from my youth. I
Mm-hmm.
remember him from when I was a little older.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't, when I was younger, it's like I didn't quite get it. It wasn't really my genre. But I think that the fascinating thing about Hendrix is the more you like music or appreciate music, the more you appreciate his playing.
Mm-hmm.
When I was doing research, I heard some jazz musicians saying, "Oh yeah, he wasn't really a jazz musician, or really wasn't a blues musician." It's like, if you've heard his blues recordings and think he's not a blues musician, I think that I'd really like to understand what your definition of blues musician is, because some of that stuff is amazing. Georgia blues, country blues. I'd never heard those tracks before I had started doing the research. I heard him play sort of bluesy things, but some of the stuff where he did blues, I found an album over at Half Price Books called South Saturn Delta. Amazing collection, of course, put together after he had passed, of demos and things that he was working on. And there's a whole treasure trove of stuff that's out on the internet, of bootlegs and demo tapes, and I'm not sure who put them together, who's selling them, old friends, old housemates, but there's a collection of tapes, now CDs, of rehearsal recordings that were done in the house he rented in New York in preparation for Woodstock. And I gotta get a copy of those, because on some of them, and they might be terrible, but still, I'd love to hear them. But on some of them, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of the same song, because they were trying different things out. And the reason I love listening to that kind of stuff is you can kind of get in their head. It's like, what did they try? What were they going for? That kind of thing. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I did it. Learned a lot. Have a lot to learn. But I'm looking forward to the Smiths. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, me too.
I think, if any of you have been around for a while listening to this thing, you probably know Sarah, otherwise known as DJ Desolation. She's been around for a while. I almost made the mistake of saying she was old. No, she's not old. She's experienced, right?
Yeah.
Her history, both of the Sting and Family History radios, is amazing. And having her teamed up with Evie, one of our newest DJs, is really exciting for me. That's going to be good. It's going to be really good for Evie to meet her.
What I think is interesting about our marathon lineup this year, Joe, is that every one of our hosts is only doing one, so I think you're going to get a lot more intimate reaction with who's hosting each week, because it's going to be somebody completely different. And the other thing is, to think about like the marathons as a whole, it's a short list than what we're used to. And I think that also, when you think about the artists, like I'm doing Stones, Ryan's doing Red Hot Chili Peppers, OG Maddie, I know, is doing Linkin Park, some of the icons that we've played here at the station over the years. I think that's really impressive in terms of the list we have put together this year, and I think the listeners are really going to appreciate that.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, we've had some people ask the question of why aren't there more, where you start late. It's like, you're asking people to give up not only the day of the marathon, but you're asking them to give up a lot of time in prep. And no one gets paid for their airtime here on this thing. We're all volunteers or students, and I hope listeners appreciate that.
Oh yeah,
that we're all doing this because we love it and we're trying to serve our community. But yeah, we're just in a real weird spot right now in terms of most of our students are not local. so it's difficult for them to participate in the summer marathon series.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a great volunteer family here at the Sting, and I think a lot of the listeners who've been listening for a long time, Ryan Radke's been here for 15, 16 years. I'm going on, I think, 5 or 6 now. I mean, and you've been here, as I said, 25 plus as the director of broadcasting and chief operator. So, the work that Joe has put into WBWC has been incredibly extensive. He's helped change when the studio changed the location. I mean, the listeners, I hope, could really appreciate that Joe T is essentially the reason we're all here to this day. So, Joe, I just want to give you that thank you. And July 21st, of course, you have a Sting Appreciation Night, a Sting Recognition Night as well. We're going to be doing all stuff to honor the Sting that night in 2 weeks. So just thought I'd throw that out for you.
Yeah, I was doing some work in here, and I pulled out the tech manual for the board here, and the final inspection is dated and signed inside there's the operator's manual, but there's the tech manual from this board specifically. And it was dated 2005. And it's like,
oh, wow.
I didn't think I put this board in almost 20 years ago, but I guess I did.
Oh, it still works like a champ.
Well, yeah, we've taken really, knock on wood, we've taken really good care
that's
of it.
True.
And it gets regular maintenance, but it's pretty good. So.
Joe's been behind the scenes, like I told everybody, for many, many years here at the Sting. So, Joe, thank you very much for all you've done, not just for the reason all our shows are possible, Joe Tarantowski, and, of course, he hosted Jimi Hendrix this past Thursday on Independence Day, the 4th of July, and Jimi Hendrix, of course, serving as well for our country. So, Jimi Hendrix, July 4th, Joe T got to host that, and Joe, thank you very much for joining Extra Innings there, his debut appearance.
My pleasure, man.
Joe Tarantowski, everybody. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, music coming up from Ozzy Osbourne. Stick around. It's 88.3 FM The Sting. It's Andrew Hoty on Extra Innings.